Okay. So what did you see in paragraph 1?
So for me, in paragraph 1, the older you are, the younger you get when you move to the United States. Like, the first thing I just marked was a big question mark, because if I were in 6th grade, I would have no idea what that meant.
Yep.
So when I was reading it, trying to put myself in a kid's shoes, I decided to mark it as a question mark and then to keep going and see if the next paragraph clarified it.
Cool. What did you see in the next paragraph, Megan?
So I agreed with Anna, and so I read the two together to make more sense out of it. So I put that older people get younger when moving to U.S., and then I drew an equal sign, narrator's equation, because he said, like, it's Garcia's equation, I'm the Garcia.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm looking at it, that would be an inference that I'm not sure I would be able to make as a 6th grader. Probably just older people get younger when moving to the U.S.
Yep. And so I like where your heads are at in terms of, I don't think that they would immediately go to what the purpose of that is yet. So I actually ended up not jotting anything about it because I didn't think that they'd get there yet, but I think that they will later. The things that I pulled out just in terms of like important things for kids to just recognize about characters, our narrator is in 8th grade, so it gives some context as to who this person is talking to us. And then I saw my first person point of view clue words, which is my and I'm, and similar to what you said, when the questions aren't as straightforward to tell you, it's good for them to automatically identify those. Anna, what about paragraph 3 stood out to you?
So paragraph 3 was the place that like clarified the rest of it.
Yep.
So the big clues there is moving from Guatemala, barely being able to speak English, learning it from the TV, and then how he describes how his dad got younger and talked like a kindergartner. That's like the sentence that I flagged. His English was worse than a kindergartner's, because I think that's kind of the key for unlocking that equation in the first paragraph.
Good. Did you have a jot or a caveman just there?
I did. I had the narrator struggles, or excuse me, dad struggles. Narrator helps like an adult.
Cool. I had kid/narrator learns English faster than father when they moved to U.S. from Guatemala. What did you have, Megan?
I had son learn English and helped his father, who was ashamed and struggled.
Cool.
And I underlined like lowered eyes, mumbles, smiles. He got younger.
Yep.
Yeah.
I really like how you added the idea of like the ashamed and struggles, because those, when our characters are feeling something, we want our kids to notice it in case it's important later. So that was smart.
Yeah.
What about paragraph 4, Megan?
So I said, I underlined Tia Juan, her uncle, just to show that it was the mom's uncle, to clarify like who all of these characters were being introduced. So I wrote Tia Juan, mom's uncle, could not work or talk. And I underlined he'd been a farmer. Here he couldn't work. He wandered around. So those were like the key behaviors I noticed. I also circled here and but here he became a little baby and wrote USA just to keep straight where this was happening.
Yep. So a big word that helps them that we talked about last year too is just this idea of but, and how it typically signals some type of a shift or a change.
Yeah.
And so identifying, there's a couple of buts that are important for them to, I know, right? It's like saying but all over 6th grade. It's really fun. But there
especially
are
the important buts.
Yeah, the important buts. The important buts are, I think, helpful for them to hear modeled out loud, or for you guys to probe and ask them what the butt is doing in that situation, which is going to be so fun.
I was trying to remember what you had called it, the signal words.
Yeah, the signal words, yeah.
Cool.
And I like how you identified that he was a farmer too. There's another but right there also that shows them the juxtaposition of the farmer back home versus not having a job here. I also just put a note that the rest of his family moved to the USA. Again, it's not, we know the story, right?
Yeah.
So we know it's not relevant, but it's something that I think we would want our kids to take note of.
Yeah, totally.
Paragraph 5. So excuse me. At the end of paragraph 4, there's also a simile. Did y'all note that there was a simile there?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
So you'll want your kids to also be looking for mainly similes in text outside of poems for the test. Those are the ones that they'll typically see if there are any questions around any figurative language.
So generally, like, because I underlined that because I flagged it, but we'll want them to write like simile, or like in the second line, here he became a little baby. We want them to like write just metaphor so they have it in their head.
Yep.
Sweet.
Gotcha. That's smart.
So for paragraph 5, this is where it solidified for me. This, like, the older you are, the younger you get. And so I actually did something that I think you can model for your kids too as like an after the fact, which is I went back and I was like, okay, I'm now better understanding this idea of when you move to the US, you get, like, the older you are, you get younger, because I'm seeing that it's happened with his uncle and his father. So then I just numbered and put the older you are, the younger you get 2 times to start to see the trend in the passage.
Okay.
Smart.
I don't think that any of your kids will do that organically, but I think you guys can intentionally model when you get to number 5. And I actually think you can model with questions. So instead of showing them that you did it, I think you can ask, like, what's the trend that we're seeing in the adults? Where have we seen it before? And how does that relate to paragraph number 1?
Okay, that's good. I wrote down who was acting like the adult in the situation to like probe them and would babysit. But I like the trends better because it shows it's coming up more than just that situation. You know?
But I think that's your opening point, right? Like that's your opening question to get at the trend is who is acting like the adult in this situation, and where have we seen this before? I like that. That's a good question. Similarly, again, like this is a small thing. We know it's not super relevant, but I put an arrow to practically fainted and put was nervous or scared, just because, again, we want them to be seeing those things. Anna, what about number 6?
So in number 6, I just read it for the plot and did my summary off to the side, and then I answered number 4. So I did not pull out anything in particular there.
Okay, cool. Megan, did you pull anything out?
I pulled out he was gone, and let's see, white straw hat. I flew, and vacant lot, because I figured they might not know what the word vacant means.
Good.
Just as like a keyword to know what that is, even though it's a garden, we learn that later. And then, answer question 4. Great. And then I went back and wrote the word motions next to gestures. But
Yep. So as a kid, I actually looked up vacant and gestures.
Okay.
And wrote their definitions both right there. Since I can use a dictionary, vacant, it said in the dictionary, not filled, used, or lived in. So that immediately for me makes me think empty. And then gestures said a movement with the body. A couple of other things that I pulled out of this paragraph. Another important word is suddenly. So that often clues them into the tone of what's going on or the feelings that the characters are feeling. Once I looked up vacant lot and knew that it was like an empty lot and that he was looking at a man with a shovel, I wrote, I can infer the man with the shovel was gardening or farming. And then I wrote, exclamation mark. Tio Juan was a farmer in Guatemala. So starting to kind of like put some things together.
Okay.
Because I learned that he was a farmer in paragraph 4.
I like that connection.
And I think that's an area where, again, you guys can ask probing questions, and then ask your kids to go back and find the evidence themselves for where they learned that he was a farmer before to be able to see that trend.
Okay.
Okay, paragraph 7, Megan.
Let's see. I underlined took his hand and then into the lot, like they went into the lot. Little garden, and then I underlined Tia-Juan smiling and trying. And then my gist was Tia-Juan is smiling at the gardener and trying to help him, and I wrote on the question, what is Tia-Juan smiling at? Before I jotted my gist, I wrote down this question to ask
Cool.
kids. Then I jotted my gist.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you just circled a word.
Yeah, so I circled but.
Yep.
Because when I was reading this, what I noticed was he pulled me.
Mhm.
And because the image of him leading Tia-Juan like a baby earlier had really stuck with me. And so the flip that he pulled me, if we have kids looking for the signal word, they're more
Yeah.
likely to check that nuance there. And similarly, just now when I was like paying attention to the signal word and what else had changed for Tia-Juan, I noticed he was smiling and trying to communicate as opposed to just like wandering around blankly like he had been doing before.
Cool. And then paragraph 8, Anna.
Yes. So the things that I underlined here was like the specific actions that Tia-Juan took. He studied the sun, then the soil. He felt it, then smelled it, then actually tasted it. And the reason that I underlined that was that it just really stuck out to me, the idea of tasting the soil and like how strange that is. So that's the thing I caught there is like his actions really showing like him taking more initiative as opposed to just like being wandering around and being
Yep.
led around, like him being the actor here.
What is, as a kid, what are you probably going to infer Tia-Juan is going to do if he is studying the sun, then the soil, feeling it, smelling it, tasting it a little bit?
So he's probably going to plant something.
Right.
Mhm.
Yep. And similar to what you pulled out, I just noticed that he was like, I put in all caps, focused Tia-Juan, because he has seemed like that wanderer
Yeah.
up until this point.
Yeah, I wrote I underlined him really wrapped up in the work and equals focus.
Yep. And I think a piece of that too that, again, we would want our kids to pull out, even though we know that it's not important ourselves for the questions, is just this idea that our narrator doesn't want his friends to see him because he's like nervous about not looking cool, or not wanting to be made fun of.
Yeah.
And then Megan, last paragraph.
So I underlined, smiled, and seemed to recognize them like old friends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because first I remember that had popped up in the passage,
Yep.
but then too his actions, where he seems like he's, familiar with the seeds. And then I underlined like the entire last part. I realized that I didn't know anything about growing food and that he knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
I stared at his fingers, his eyes, they were focused, not far away or confused. He changed back from a baby into a man, and I starred that. And then I wrote again the same question that I asked earlier. Who was acting like the adult at the garden? Why has Tia-Juan changed? Just like the flip of who's
That's
acting
great.
like the adult.
I like that.
Yep.
repetition.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
I guess I would also circle the like to just point out that that's a simile.
Yep.
Even if I hadn't already answered that question. And I wrote lesson. I was trying to get some students to identify kind of like when we learn a lesson,
Great.
so when we think the characters are learning a lesson.
Perfect.
For the
So what
theme.
is the like lesson or theme that you would have pulled out from that last line?
So the lesson for the narrator and for us would be I realized that I didn't know anything about growing food and that he knew everything. For me.
And I
And
think,
then he changed from a baby back into a man.
and I think the other chunk of it, and I'm having trouble like wording it in a super student friendly way, is that like knowing what you're doing is what makes you feel like an adult. So when he's in the garden and he knows what's going on, that's when he's a man and not a baby, as opposed to when he or the dad are trying to like deal with the landlady, they're babies because they just don't know what they're doing. So like there's something, I guess, empowering about being knowledgeable, something there.
Yep, I like that a lot. I jotted his work gave him purpose again. So just this idea that when you have a purpose, you similarly.
Yeah.
I also saw, I circled smiled because there was a trend in what was happening when Tia-Juan was smiling, which was that he was like engaging with the soil and the seeds. and then another but. More buts. Woo. Okay. Yeah, they're like all over this passage. So if you want to introduce signal words with this passage, it would probably be a good one.
Do you have a list of signal words?
Yeah.
That we can. Okay.
I can
Sweet.
give them to you.
Thank you.
And yes, I was supposed to do that too. I apologize, but I will get it to you today.
Thank you.
But is the
I don't
most
mean to
important
be
signal
too.
word. All right, so let's look at the questions, and more so, I want to look at them because I want to see what you guys have on the side of yours.
Mhm.
5th grade last year, it was like, I want to see that you have your evidence.
Mhm.
When I taught 6th grade 2 years ago, it was like, I want to see that you have your evidence for the right answer, and I also want to know why the wrong answer is wrong.
Okay.
And I think it's a good practice for them to start to get into, especially because then moving on, they can start arguing why
Okay.
an answer is or is not correct, or backing it up.
Mm-hmm.
So we can kind of talk through a couple of those. 2 strategies as well, or I guess 1 strategy applied to 2 answers in the summary question, or the summary answers, is that B and D automatically are out because there are things that are like incorrect or that there was no evidence for in the passage. So that's something that you'll want to model for them, that they should look for in the
Right.
summary answers. B, there's no evidence that he was upset
Mhm.
throughout the passage. D, there's no evidence that Gonzalo accompanies Tio1 to the garden every day. So automatically they're setting themselves up to just have 2 to choose from.
Okay.
Eliminating those distractors will really help them.
Cool.
Number 2, where did you all get your evidence from?
So I just wrote down paragraph 7 to 9. I didn't give the specific line numbers for
Okay.
where it comes up.
I did paragraph 9, lines 1 through 8 for me.
Cool.
Just like the entire paragraph 9.
Yep.
But I see paragraph 7 from there down at this point.
So I have paragraph 7, line 4, paragraph 8, lines 3 through 5, and paragraph 9, line 4 through 8. I would push you guys when you do your work before to have them that specific.
Okay.
Because then when you're looking for kids, if kids say paragraph 9, you're like,
Yeah.
no,
Mhm.
what line is it that told you? Because that's when you start to get some like wacko lines, and you're like, you actually didn't really understand
Right.
what you were doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And it'll unpack a lot for you guys.
Mhm.
And then in terms of like why an answer is incorrect, so let's just look at G. When you move to the United States, you must learn English quickly. I have a reason why I would put down that it's not the right answer. What would you guys say?
So that's one I thought might actually be tricky for kids because
Yep.
so much of their struggle does have to do with not being able to communicate. But for me, the reason it's not the correct answer is that, like, Tio1 is the person who has the change. He's the person whose life gets better, and he didn't learn English. Like, that had nothing to do with it. So that's why I would say she's not correct.
Perfect. I put Tio1 didn't end up learning
Mhm.
it in the story.
Yeah.
And as a kid, if I can identify that this whole story is mainly about Tio1,
Mm-hmm.
that yes, our narrator is a very important character, but Tio1 is like who it's spotlighted on,
Mhm.
then I can pull that out. Older people should not leave their homes. Megan, do you have an idea as to what a student could write to the side as to why that's incorrect?
So Tio1 started changing for the better whenever he was out of his home.
Exactly.
Gardening.
Yep. And it seems so simple, but it's a really good thought process for our kids to go through.
Yep.
And then Jay, what I would write there is just like, there's no evidence that this was an idea.
That was
Yeah.
never, like, an issue.
Right,
in
yeah,
the
exactly.
passage, yeah.
Number 3, which sentence from the story best represents the story's conflict? What was y'all's evidence for C?
I just answered it.
Okay.
I said paragraph 4, lines 2 to 3, but that's where
it comes from.
Comes from, yeah.
And now that's where it comes from, but there's more around it because I put the same evidence, and because it's like,
excuse me.
Oh, right, since before and after.
And the big piece there after is like he'd been a farmer, but here he couldn't work. So that signaling for kids, like when they were reading, that probably would signal that there's an issue. Like, oh man, he can't work. What would make he seemed to recognize them like old friends? Incorrect.
That's actually part of the solution.
Perfect. Yep. B, there's an important word here that exactly,
right.
yes.
Because that's talking about the father, not Tiawan. It's a story about the father.
Yep.
Or excuse me, Tiawan.
Yeah. Right, yeah, exactly. Yep, and I circled he. I circled he also, and that's why it could not have been an answer for me. And then D, one afternoon I was watching TV Getting Smart on the Brady Bunch.
That was just about the narrator, and I didn't really think it's not really the problem for T01.
Yeah, I also put that's actually like a positive thing.
Yeah,
because he was learning English, smart. So it's the opposite of a conflict. Okay. Number 4. So this is where their like identification that there's a simile here is super important, which is why we want to make sure that they know that these are happening in stories and not just poems. Which I think you guys have done a lot of like figurative language outside of poetry this year, so they should be used to it. Walk me through what you would want, like what would you want kids to infer and how after reading just these 2 lines? Anyone can start.
So like when they're going through the questions, what thought process? Okay. So the first thing I would want them to be able to do is to locate where this came from in the story and make sure that they could know like all the antecedents for the pronouns. So he couldn't read the words is T01. He recognized them. He recognized the seeds. That's the first thing. Then after that, it seems to me to make the most sense for them to actually go through the answer choices.
Okay. So when it says use a metaphor to describe how T01 changed.
So they should be able to say, okay, well, I don't think I saw a metaphor there. And I definitely didn't see evidence of T01 changing. So that should be what eliminates that question.
Great.
Similarly with G, details, like, okay, maybe to help the reader understand Gonzalo's family, by knowing that it's about T01 and the seeds, we know that's not it. Because it's describing something totally different.
Perfect.
H looks good. And then J, hyperbole, again, don't think it's there. And it's not describing Gonzalo or Gonzalo's feelings.
Perfect.
So it should be put out that way.
Yep. And so this is one of those questions where, which it's hard to get kids to get used to this. When you see a word that's in a paragraph, you need to go back to the paragraph. When they're going to box sentences for you, you really need to focus your energy on those sentences and not think about as much context that's happening outside of it.
Yeah, because I could see how for F, kids would get confused
if they kept on
if they've
reading
been
and noticed
thinking
the
about how
change.
he changed. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's something to model there too.
So would you recommend when we see these, would you recommend having kids mark, I mean this was the end of the paragraph, but if it were, another passage, should they come back here and pause in the middle of the story or when the lines are inserted? Or should they come back?
Like answer a question.
Yeah.
Because I wrote that down, but even though it was the last paragraph.
Yep. I think that it's fine if they pause and they go and answer the question. If you guys talk to them about now you have some context for the story, you're still going to focus your energy on what they're telling you in this box right here. Which is why for some of your kids you're going to be able to say like that's a star question. The majority of your kids you would be able to say that's a star question.
Okay.
Okay, we have time for like one more.
Okay.
Is there, actually let's pause because I think we did a lot of like good work with that. Is there anywhere in the story where you guys want to talk through really quickly questioning or how to unpack something with kids where you're pushing them to unpack it and not unpacking it yourselves? And don't feel pressured to have an area because we did a lot of unpacking together, so
Yeah.
there might not be.
I think pulling out the signal words will be really helpful for having them pick out like the climax of the story instead of us kind of like, where he changed, how did he change, you know, like what did we notice, and walking through that thought process. I think something to maybe where they don't get confused, like talking about the father and the uncle. I don't know if that's just me, but I feel like between the two characters right there, I would probably get confused if the story is still about his father.
So what transition word signals to you that a change happens?
Then.
In paragraph 4. The first word, then, is going to signal to them that all of a sudden something else is coming. And they can shift their lens. Cool.
Great.
All right, Shedrick and I are excited to come in and see this on Wednesday.
It's exciting.
In terms
And-
of walking through the questions, sorry, one more question. Would you have us modeling like why each one's incorrect, or is that the point where we probably want to release them and have them doing that on their own after we've gone through the story?
So to level set what this should look like for them for the next 3 weeks, I would definitely go through it together.
Okay.
I would ask them who can tell me why this answer choice is wrong, but I would still do it together so that you're up on your dot cam writing it out and they can see.
Fantastic.
And they're writing it out, and then this is going to serve as their, this should then go into their folder and serve as their like exemplar for the rest of the time.
Okay. Fabulous.
Take this out, go back to it, look at all of the work that you did, look where that got us. Renorm yourself on what your work should be looking like right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Coolio.
This will be
Thanks,
helpful.
ladies.
The one we did today was short.
Yeah.
So,
It'll be helpful for them to have a longer one.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of, this is from Kira.
And
work.
speaking of, I'll speak with her.
really?
And speaking of, did y'all see my email about some of them will have read this?
Yes.
Not a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I remember some of them telling
It
me
was
about it.
it was a really,
Or just
it
maybe seeing
was
it.
weird in literature circles last year, so only a small portion of the class read it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
Or maybe just
And
see
we
the
didn't
language.
unpack
The questions
it
are not the
this
same.
much at all.
Right.
So yeah,
I like
Fabulous.
that.
awesome. Thanks,
Thank
ladies.
you.
Thank you. And we also have your binder. We ran copies of like
The
two of
amazing
the
binder.
IAs and the binder
Oh,
and all
cool.
the stuff if you want it back.
You guys
So
don't
I'm
need
like,
it anymore,
I don't
We
think so.
ran copies.
Just the
Thank
passage
you.
we're gonna use.
just so that you have it. That's
Yeah.
great. No, there's no
Yeah,
problem
we're
with
good.
that at all. I'll grab it from you.
Great.
They
Thank
just
you.
had some really good. It had some really good passages.
Yeah.
In those
That's
IAs.
great.
That
Yeah,
are
I
like
know.
more interesting.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah, those IAs are
interesting.
fabulous.
All right, thanks, ladies.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
y'all.
you.
Thank you.
Is this yours?